Are you there, Daniel? Can you comment maybe on question one? Because I'm not sure I get your question. Why can I access that database? Well, you have to log into MySQL to use any database. Test is created automatically when you install MySQL, and whereas World has to be created. Um, and again, the answer to 2 is no, you can't mess it up. Are the tables rearranged to the index? No, they're not. The index is a separate file structure. It's a separate file. So the table is not rearranged itself. A separate table or index file is created. Um, so, it's just like the index in the back of a book. It's actually a separate area. They're not really indexed to the primary key. They're indexed to a separate table. And the table is basically a two-column structure, with one being the index value and the second being essentially a pointer to where on disk the database can find that data. Unique index. Is the unique ID self-generated, or is it entered into the ID column? It is not self-generated. The only time it's self-generated is when you use the auto increment. Unique index essentially says that the column that you create the unique index on has to be unique. This is basically what a primary key is. It's a unique index. But the unique index, a primary key will automatically get a unique index when you create a primary key. That's automatic. When you create a second unique index on something, you're just saying that this data, which is probably real-world data, like a social security number, has to be unique. And you would use it for that purpose. If you're getting some data, maybe it's a social security number, maybe it's an external ID from another system or something, you might use this to guarantee the uniqueness of that column. If null, you mentioned it briefly, it's part of chapter 10, page 191. Can you show an example? Yeah, I can show an example. Basic example would be something like select if null email, let's say no email. Typing started. Okay, and I'll show you an actual example. I have to start MySQL first to do that. Oh, looks like it's already running. Okay, so let's take a look. Look at here. See how the state has nulls in it a lot? Let's try that one as an example. Let's say we'll take the last name, first name, and let's say city. So let's say if null city, then assume San Mateo. Right? So now you see that where you had nulls here before, you now got the word San Mateo. No, I didn't say it couldn't be installed on the C drive. Sorry, if I said that, I was wrong. No, you can install, because I've got it installed on my D drive. So you can install it on a, it doesn't matter. I think by default it goes on the C drive just like everything else. Do you need the book? Well, it's a good idea to get it, although the material that's on web access and my website is probably enough. You can get the book off of Amazon. That's the book. I think it's a good idea to get the book, especially if you want to take the certification exam. But otherwise, you don't really need the book. I mean, if you're tight for money or something, then don't go broke buying it. The name of the book, yeah, it's on my website. Okay, so let's look at the rest. For assignment 2, it looks like I could just follow the doctor-patient relationship and add the section between classes and registration. Um, yeah, you need an extra table, so that will probably work. Okay, so that's one question that I got off of Web Access. Let me see what else we got. Can you have multiple patients or multiple providers in a single encounter in the ER, or do you have to create the table in another way to do so? Good question. Yes, you can. That's a very good question. And the answer is yes, you can have them, for sure. Let's go back to ER diagram. Yeah, very good question. Typically, the way it goes is you have a primary provider, and that's what this would be. And right now, the way most people, the way it works in most systems, is that they have what they call an admitting doctor, and which is usually the patient's primary care doctor. They have the attending doctor, who's the doctor who takes care of you. And in our current system, which is kind of an older system that we're getting rid of because we're going to Epic, we've also got room for 8 consulting doctors. Now that's denormalized because we have a repeating field. And because you can absolutely see multiple doctors, not only in the ER, but if you're an inpatient, you may have several specialists look at you. So you absolutely can have many. Now, the way we currently do it is a denormalized way, but it's an older system, so that's why. But technically, if you wanted to do it a normalized way, you would create another table. You would create another table here where you'd have to break it off. Typically, the provider would be moved out of encounters. And let's just see what we can do here. Copy. Let's go. So typically, what you would do is then you would wind up creating another table, and I'm just going to draw it. I'm not exactly sure what we would call it, but you would have here as a foreign key, you would have the encounter ID. You wouldn't put the patient ID again. That wouldn't be necessary. Oops. And you'd have as a foreign key the provider ID. So that in that way, you'd be able to put multiple providers there, and of course, you'd have to have a relationship between them. Where are we at now? I don't know. You have to have a relationship between them, which would go like that, and it would look something like that, right? So you'd have another, and you might have some other information in here. You might have some sort of field to describe what role the doctor played. Like they were the attending doctor, or maybe they were the cardiology specialist, or something else, and something like that. So, in order to handle that sort of situation in a normalized way, which is the way it should be handled, you would add a new table. Now, every system that I've worked on in the hospital doesn't have this relationship. They have repeating fields, which is not normalized, like having multiple phone numbers or something. But in newer applications, they would add that additional table. So that was a very good question. That was Claude Wu.